Welcome to Flip Lesson 28 for the 6th grade. Today we're going to start talking about angles and how angles work. Before we get into that, we want to first talk about, how angles are formed, and that comes with our relationship between lines. We have three known relationships. We have parallel lines, which are lines that run right next to each other and will never intersect. And so really there aren't true angles being formed there, though some might argue that you have a 180-degree angle, which is a straight line. But most angles come from either perpendicular lines or oblique lines, which are the groups of intersecting lines. And you can see the different ways that these two types of lines come together. And so understanding how lines intersect and how the relationship between lines helps us understand angles. All right. Then, when it comes to angles, the first thing we want to talk about is how to name an angle. An angle itself, when it stands alone, is going to have a vertex. That's where our smiley face is. So that's the point where two rays come together. And so we have two rays in this picture, one heading up this way and one heading this way. And so these two rays make up our angle. Now, as we look at the picture, we see that we have one letter that signifies which angle we're talking about. And so the first way we could name this angle or name an angle is if you have an angle by itself and you have a single letter at the vertex, you can call it angle A. And so you have our first example. Now, if our angles were different and we had two additional points, then we would need to use some different ideas when it comes to naming our angles. So if we had a configuration like this, we can't call it just angle A now. We want to use three letters to help us understand that. And so once again, we're going to start with the angle symbol. We always got to start with that. And then we can go one of two things. We can start with point B and then put our vertex in the middle and then go to our second ray, which is where C is, and we've named it that way. You can also name it the opposite way with C, A, and B. The key thing here is as you use 3 points to name an angle, the centermost letter must be the vertex. Must be the vertex. Another thing you might run into as you are working with angles is sometimes instead of points and dots, you'll see a number inside in between the different rays. And that's the third or fourth way that you could name this angle, if that is there. And this would be angle 1. And so there's a number of different options when it comes to naming angles, but that is how we can name it. Another thought when it comes to naming angles has to do with the types of angles. Angles are specifically named by the points on the angle itself, yet at the same time, we can name angles by their different shapes. And so our first angle, right, is a right angle, which has a measurement of exactly 90 degrees, which is symbolized by the box. And that is our right angle. Our other two type of angles would be our obtuse angle, which is going to be greater than 90 degrees. And then you have your acute angles, which is going to be less than 90 degrees. So any angle that fits those measurement rules in terms of degrees is going to fit with this idea. Now, if I were to start putting some dots on here and putting some labels, we could start naming these different angles. All right, and I could say C, Q, and R on this one, and I'm going to call this W, V, X, and Y. Right. So when it comes to naming this right angle, right, because it's a standalone angle, we could say it's angle Q. But because there are 3 points, it's probably better to name it with 3 points. So it could be CQR, or the opposite of RQC. All right. How about our obtuse angle? Now, one thing we got to be careful of is we cannot call it just angle V, because even though that is the vertex is shared with our acute angle also, so we cannot call it angle V. So in this case, we must name it according to 3 letters. So our obtuse angle would end up being angle W, V, X, or it could be the opposite of angle X, V, W. And then with our acute angle, we're going to follow that same principle. And we could say angle X, V, Y, or angle Y, V, X, like that. And so we have naming these different angles. Then, I'm going to leave you with this sample problem. It's a complex group of angles, and I want you to name the right angle, name an obtuse angle, name an acute angle. And there may be more than one of some of these, but you just need to name one of them. And we'll see what we can do in terms of that. And so that's our look at angles, specifically talking about how to name angles, and then identifying angles by right, obtuse, and acute. That's lesson 28.